Okay. Give it another minute or two. You got to make sure you have lots of dead air on YouTube. Hi, Stacy.
Hi, how are you? You got all fancy with your background.
Do you know how to raise your hand in Zoom?
You know what? I had to, let me see. Yep, okay, yep, I can figure that out.
Okay, and then in general, we'll ask people to mute in case there's background noise.
Sure.
As we're going on. Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Megan, I think we should get started.
Okay. It's good.
So we'll start with roll call. So if everybody can, how are we going to do this?
You read them off.
You want me to read them all?
Yeah, if you can call everybody.
All right. Mr. Bergeron?
Present.
And Mr. Carroll is not here. Mr. Seaver is not here. Mr. Chris?
I can't hear you. You're breaking up.
Mr. Finnegan?
Here.
Miss LeBlanc?
Yep, I'm here.
Miss or Mrs.?
Miss.
Okay. All right. Mr. Martelli?
Here.
And Chairman Duval?
Present.
And Mr. Staples?
Here.
Okay. I think that's everyone.
What about Mr. Engler?
Mr. Englers?
I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Sorry, I was probably breaking up when I...
All right, so we have 1, 2, 3. There are 6 full members present and 1 associate member, that's Riley Bergeron. So Mr. Bergeron will act as a full member. He will be able to vote and make motions. Yeah, so yes, Mr. Staples.
I'm also an associate member.
You are an associate member. Okay, so we have 2 associate members here, both of whom will act as full members for the, well, at least for the first item. The agenda has the minutes. They were not ready in time, so we're going to push the approval of the minutes from the May meeting to the July meeting. So we'll come back to that, which brings us to our first item, which is the special exceptions public hearing on Auburn Renewables, which is a 35-acre, 5-megawatt solar array on 2 parcels, totaling roughly 82 acres on Riverside Drive. This is the first solar project that has been proposed for the Agriculture and Resource Protection Zoning District. So with that, we'll ask for the staff report.
Yeah, so this is a proposal for a solar project in the Ag Zone. Should be a good opportunity for the planning board to use the new ordinance that was recommended to City Council and approved on June 1st. The City Council approved almost exactly what the planning board recommended. There was one change that we as staff suggested to the total land area provision. The provision required the planning board to look at the total land area in the Ag Zone that's proposed and currently used for solar and make a recommendation that the solar project under review will not materially alter the stability of the overall land use pattern of the Ag Zone. We realized after the fact that without a solar project in the ag zone, there wouldn't really be a baseline for the planning board to make this type of recommendation. So we suggested that the provision kick in once 1% of the ag zone is used for solar projects, which is like 200 acres, about 200 acres, I think we estimated. So we're anticipating it'll kick in after about 4 to 5 projects come before the planning board. Then we'll start looking at the total land area and making those determinations. So other than that, the city council approved exactly what the planning board recommended for the ordinance. In the staff report, we provided a breakdown of the standards in the solar ordinance and how that they've been addressed by the applicant. So tonight, I was just going to go through some of those since we received that updated information that was emailed out on Friday and see where we leave off. So the first were really just the basic questions, just making sure that the height is going to be under 30 feet, which it's assumed, but just the ordinance caps the height at 30 feet. So we had made sure that they won't have any equipment exceeding that, and they will not. Other question we had was about glare. So the project is not located in the airport overlay, but the ordinance still requires that any potential glare impacts be minimized. And the site's pretty well buffered on all sides, so they're not anticipating any glare impacts. And they're also, the solar panels are oriented away from Riverside Drive, so there won't be any impacts to Riverside Drive from the panels themselves. Another question was about lighting. They're not proposing any lighting for any portion of the project. Sometimes we hear about structures that they need to house equipment for solar installations, and oftentimes they'll have safety lights on them, but they're not proposing any equipment type buildings or lighting at the project. We asked for a cost estimate for the decommissioning, and they did provide one. You'll note it doesn't include a breakdown of what goes into the $90,000, but they did provide a breakdown in their application of the decommissioning process and what's going into that. So we assume that the $90,000 includes all of those items that are discussed, but the planning board may want to clarify that as a condition. And the big item that we asked them about was the clearing. And really we were looking for a breakdown of the thought process behind how solar installations are sited, and to give the planning board some more information on how clearing, prime soils, and the other items that we discussed during the ordinance drafting process played a role in the project scoping discussion. The applicant, they obviously, you'll see in their response, they have to strike a balance between making a project feasible and also meeting all of the state and local requirements. And sometimes state and local requirements can prioritize items that they want to protect differently. So they explained their process about how they used a shading analysis to determine the best place for the solar project in relation to the number of trees that they would have to clear. It looks like they're going to have to clear about 16 acres, which accounts for impacts for potential shading and tree fall. Sorry. So they also have about half an acre that they're proposing to clear for prime soils. So by clearing, or sorry, half an acre of what they're proposing to clear are actually prime soil areas. So by clearing in that area, they'll actually be opening up about a half an acre of prime soils to add to the already existing prime soil areas. And they do have to occupy some prime soils with the project. And if you remember, the ordinance has a few requirements to be able to use prime soils and to be able to clear. Can't be any necessary soil erosion, which they're trying to mitigate for the most part. Some things they can't avoid, but they're planning to keep the soil on site and planning to keep with the existing contours to address that. They can't, at the time of decommissioning, the planning board that is sitting has to make a determination as to whether or not the area that was cleared should be replanted or left open for as a farming area. And that's something that will be determined down the road. They provided their survey of critical habitat, and they also provided some information from the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and they provided their vegetation plan. So they've addressed the items that we had in the ordinance to be able to use the prime soils. And so they're also occupying some non-prime farmland area and clearing, and provided an explanation as to how they selected the area that they selected. So I think where we have a new ordinance for solar projects in the ag zone and where this is our first project, they've done a pretty good job providing all of the information that the planning board was looking for. But I think it would be helpful for the planning board to hear from the applicant and ask them some questions about your interpretation of the new standards and how they've addressed them in their application. Just because where it's our first one, it's really going to set a precedent for how we review future solar projects in the ag zone.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Any questions for staff?
I don't have any questions.
So I see that Mr. Sear is joining us. His audio is still connecting. Mr. Sear, hello.
Hello.
You want to state your name for roll call?
Yes, Evan Sear, and I apologize for being late. My wife had to work late tonight, and I was taking care of the kids with supper. I have, however, been able to follow along in the live stream, so I'm completely up to date and was following along with the information that's been provided so far.
Excellent, thank you. So we were at the point of asking questions of staff. If you have a question for staff, please raise your hand. None? Okay, I have one that's, oh wait, we've got one. Mr. Staples. You're muted.
Thank you. Is that okay? Yeah. So with the decommissioning plan, I'm just kind of wondering, what's the how do we make sure that this happens? When it is time to decommission, is there any oversight, or I guess I'm just not sure what that process is from the city's standpoint.
Yeah. So we are going to request that, or at least this was what we discussed as part of the ordinance, was putting up a performance bond for the cost of decommissioning that we will hold. And at the time of decommissioning 20 years down the road, they'll have to go before the planning board. And the planning board at that time will decide whether or not the site should remain as is, should be converted into prime farmland, if that's what the area is looking like, or if it should just be reforested and replanted to look like it does today. So the planning board didn't want to specifically require what that decommissioning looks like today, because we don't really know what it's going to look like out there in 20 years, but hopefully that performance bond and the contingency the city will hold on to and be able to use to make sure that that process happens.
So would the city then be responsible for the decommissioning since they have the bond, or would the landowner be doing it?
It would be the landowner. The city can take the bond if the landowner doesn't follow through with that and complete the decommissioning.
Okay, thank you.
So I have one question for staff that might be better addressed to the applicant. I'm not sure, but I wasn't quite sure which areas were going to be graded and how much area was actually going to be graded. Do you have numbers on that?
I don't believe they sent over those numbers. I know they identified some areas on the plan. Let me see.
So in what Eric's showing, is it the fingerprint area? Yeah, okay.
I believe so, yeah. Yeah. And they might have the exact figure as to how much square footage that is.
Mr. Engler,
Yes, I saw in the applicant response.
oh, you froze. Mr. Engler, you froze, so we heard none of you.
Oh, can I be heard now?
Yes.
Thank you. So I saw in the applicant responses that they said that about the glare issue, that these were a special type of panels meant to absorb rather than reflect light. Does city staff know anything about the technical merits of that response? It almost seems like smart alecky.
Yeah, I think that's the exact language that we have in our ordinance. So I think they had just taken the language from our ordinance that says that while we recognize panels are designed to absorb and not reflect sunlight, we also recognize that they can produce glare impacts, and we want to make sure that those are addressed. So I think they were just reiterating what the ordinance says, and also provided an explanation that they're going to be oriented away from Riverside Drive and that they're buffered on all of the other sides. So, but I don't have, in terms of being able to technically say, yes, your solar panels are not going to produce any glare. I don't think we have that information. We required that glare analysis for the airport overlay specifically.
Right.
So that's certainly something that they can elaborate a little bit more on too.
Thanks.
Further questions for staff? Okay, hearing none, we can open it up to hear from the applicant.
Okay. So I brought Henry in. If there's any other members, applicants, if you could just raise your hand, or Henry could tell us which ones, and we'll bring you in as well. Palmer, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm joined by my colleague Palmer Moore from Nexamp, who's here as well, and then a couple of folks from TRC, our civil engineers on this, that I guess if now's the good time, maybe can you unmute multiple people at once?
Yep.
Okay. So I think it's Heather, Nicole, and Cindy.
Could one of them be calling in from a 207 phone number? I've got Heather's promoted, but I'm not seeing anybody else. Palmer's a panelist now.
We don't have any video on him.
It's telling me I can't start the video for some reason. I'll keep working on that.
Am I still there?
Megan, the call-in number is from Mystique Way.
Okay, great. So I think that's all we have on our attendee list for this project, are the ones that are on the panelist list now.
Okay, hold on one second here.
So it looks like the three of you can be heard, so.
Palmer, I think my video is working now. Is that correct? Can people see me?
Your video is working, Palmer.
Great, thank you.
You are a little quiet.
I'm a quiet person, sorry about that.
I saw that coming.
Am I still there? Sorry about this. Can folks hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know if my videos were here or not, but we'll go ahead and get started then, I guess. I guess I'll just jump off with a quick introduction of NextAmp, and then TRC, our civil engineers, can dive into more project-specific questions around the engineering and those related aspects. I think before, I just wanted to thank the planning board and Megan and Eric for all of your work on putting together this ordinance. I know it's a big issue, and you guys have put a lot of thought and effort into it. So just really appreciate it. And so NextAmp, we are going to be the long-term owner-operator of this array. We have a large presence in Maine with projects across the state that we are working on currently. We are very excited to bring this project forward to the city and the local community. I think we may have discussed in a previous meeting, but this project will be structured, we're open to structure it as a community solar project where local residents and businesses can sign up to subscribe to the project and receive credits on their bill on a monthly basis. So the project itself is going to be roughly 5 megawatts AC, which is comprised of about 30 acres of the fenced area. As you can see, it's and we talk about in the permit application, but it's going to be mainly sited on open field that's currently hayed right now. As you discussed, there will be some tree clearing. But as we mentioned, we try to minimize any impacts on wetlands or other sensitive areas within the site, taking into consideration shading and topography and the overall project size and feasibility. Decommissioning already came up, so at the end of the project life, we'll remove all of the equipment, the panels, associated equipment, and leave the site as it was. Generally, it's a kind of your quote unquote standard solar project with the related equipment and access road that we'll construct coming off of Riverside Drive, 2 equipment pads with some inverter equipment on there. They'll be all fenced in. The panels will be about 9 feet in height, and about 3 feet off the ground at the lowest point. And then we'll also proposing, as you mentioned, our vegetation management plan to have sheep in there for grazing and to keep the growth down, which I think we've done this on several projects, and it's a great way to avoid using lawnmowers and other internal combustion engines to manage the vegetation there. And so I think that's basically it in a nutshell. I don't know if there's other specific questions or if I should turn it over to TRC to kind of walk through some of the engineering aspects at this point.
Hi, can everybody? Okay.
Yep.
Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut anyone off.
No, I was asking you to continue.
Oh, okay. Great. My name is Heather Stalazzi Ward. I'm with TRC. I am a wetland scientist and permit specialist. Our engineer is currently trying to join in on the meeting. I believe they're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but I can give you basically a broad overview of the project from a permitting perspective and from a natural resource perspective. As you know, we had applied with the Army Corps of Engineers, and that is for a Category 2 permit application. We recently received approval for that, and quite happy with the timeliness of the permit. We are currently under review from the Maine Department of Environmental Protection for a Site Location of Development Act permit, as well as a Natural Resource Protection Act permit, a Tier 1. We have not received any approvals from the DEP yet, but we are in correspondence with them, and they've had quite a few questions and also favorable outlook to the project in general. More of the questions relay upon the stormwater engineering, and we've been able to provide them with some good information. And I think that their review period is coming up very soon, but they should have enough and ample time to have analysis of the responses we've provided. Those are the 2 or 3 major permit applications that we're currently under review and have received permits for. From a natural resource perspective, the wetlands on site are fairly standard wetlands. Some of them have been impacted in the past by agricultural activity. We've tried to avoid and minimize the largest and most valuable wetlands on site.
Hello? Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Saji, and I'm the engineer on Nexam Riverside project. So for this project, the entire panel area will be maintained as a meadow condition, and the linear portion of the developed area, which is the gravel drive and the equipment pads, they will be treated with meadow buffers that are being placed along the access drive to meet the water quality. And yeah, I mean, that should address the DEP regulations and the local regulations.
Okay. So any more from that you Nexamp folk want to say? If not, we have some questions.
We may have lost Heather.
Looks like Heather's gone, and yeah. But we'll we have one question from the planning board. So Mr. Sear.
Yeah, thank you. So in looking at the site plan, and I'm not sure if it was Mr. Engler that brought up who it was that brought up the grading earlier. It's clear that there's going to be some substantial grading, at least in one area of the site. And then looking at the contours, I guess my question is, what impact do you believe that's going to have on the neighbors? Specifically, I'm looking to the where that grading would occur. This would be most likely to affect neighbors to the northeast, the lot to the northeast, given the way the current grading is. So are you able to speak to that?
Yeah, this is Saji. So the grading, we're proposing about 41,000 square feet, which is about less than an acre, and that is to facilitate the construction of driving the piles of the solar site. So if anything, we're actually reducing the steep slopes that are currently there. So it should actually improve when it's too steep, the flow is is more into the neighbors, but when we are reducing the slopes, it should actually reduce the slope. That should only help the neighboring property.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions from the planning board?
Okay.
So I have one. Can you clarify for me where the Atlantic salmon habitat is and what the impact, how that relates to the installation that you're proposing?
I can speak to that. Sorry about that. My internet connection dropped off, so I apologize. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great, excellent. So there's actually not Atlantic salmon habitat on the site, but the stream, let's see, can I request controls here? The stream off to the western side of the property does flow into Atlantic salmon habitat, but the actual stream itself is not Atlantic habitat. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Martelli?
Yeah, that stream goes into Androscoggin River there, but my question is, they just brought up the sheep thing. You're going to have animals out there. Who's going to take care of them? Is there going to be a caretaker every day?
Yeah, so thank you for saying that, because I made a note to myself. I was like, who's going to manage the sheep? This is my first time on this call, but I'm just kind of a very legitimate question.
Yeah, so generally the sheep will just be let loose. So they're within the fenced area anyway. So they're in a contained area. Generally they're left there. Obviously the farmer, will contract with the farmer to provide that. But they'll provide water, other nutrients that they need, and they will go and check on them periodically. But for the most part, they're just left to eat and sleep and do their, sheep thing.
Have you guys done this before with other projects?
We have, yeah.
Okay. And how has it worked out?
It's been great. They, unlike some other animals, they don't really bother the equipment itself. They just like to eat the grass, so there's no issues with, eating into the wires or anything that goats or other animals might do. They keep the vegetation under control and really pretty low maintenance. And again, it's avoiding the use of lawnmowers and tractors and brush hogs or weed whackers and everything like that.
Yeah, because in that area there are coyotes, so.
And fishers.
So I see Mr. Engler has his hand raised.
Yeah, on the livestock issue, is it Nexamp's general practice that the landholder that's leasing the land is the same farmer that takes care of the sheep?
I guess it could be that situation. Generally, we use a separate sheep farmer to bring in the sheep. In the case where the landowner is that person, then that may work out, but in this case, no.
Thank you.
Any additional questions from the board? All right, seeing none, we'll say thank you to the applicant.
Thank you very much.
And at this time, we'd like to proceed to the public hearing portion. In order to start that, I'll need a motion.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay, so now we'd like to invite members of the public who wish to speak on this project.
I'll assume that it was a unanimous vote to.
Oh, right, we got to vote.
So
Forgot about that.
is Mr. Bergeron and Mr. Sear voting on this item?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Bergeron,
Yes.
Mr. Sear,
Yes.
Mr. Engler,
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan,
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mr. Martelli,
Yes.
and Chairman Duval.
Yes. Mr. Staples?
Yes.
Or do we need
I wasn't thinking about voting anymore.
3, 4, 5, 6? Yeah, okay, so we don't need you for this.
Matt. Mr. Chairman, was Mr. Staples elevated to a regular member?
He was for this first. Yes, he was for this first.
Okay, so prior to my entering the meeting, I'll give a little sort of institutional memory here. In a case like that, the last regular member to have shown up would still continue to sit out. So it seems that in this case, it would be me. And because Mr. Staples, even though I was aware of the information and fully apprised of it, because Mr. Staples began as a voting member, it's my understanding that he would continue as the voting member and that I would not officially enter the meeting until the next item.
Okay, that makes sense.
I apologize for not thinking to bring that up earlier.
I apologize as well. I miscounted. So thank you all. So from now on, Mr. Staples will vote for the remainder of this item.
And also as such, I forgot, I will be excluding myself from the discussion as well.
Okay.
We should proceed as though I'm not here.
Okay. So now we have moved, seconded, and voted on opening public comment.
We have 12 attendees, and I think all of them are here for other projects. There may be one or two that I'm not sure what projects they're here for, but if they want to speak, they can raise their hands.
Seeing no hands, do I have a motion to close public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Bergeron? He's not here. Mr. Engler?
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan?
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc? Mr. Martelli?
Yes.
Mr. Staples?
Yes.
And Chairman Duval.
Yes. Okay, so now the time for planning board to discuss what are people's thoughts on this project and on the application. Mr. Martelli.
I'm all for it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bergeron.
Actually, should have asked this with staff earlier. The 5% number on the decommissioning. I remember the one of the projects we were reviewing earlier. They did include salvage, potential salvageable costs, but that wasn't. I was wondering about the bond. So the bond that Auburn holds, does that, if there was salvage costs included, would it be a smaller bond, or would it be something that we don't include the salvage because we'd not be able to predict the cost of or that benefit of decommissioning those at the time.
That's correct. We wouldn't include the salvage value, so we would get the bond with the 5% contingency, and if they were to walk away from the project, then whatever salvageable value is there in 20 years, the city would keep as part of the decommissioning.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Engler.
I agree with Mr. Martelli that this is a great project. It looks basically like the types of solar projects that I was imagining when we wrote the ordinance. And also the development team seemed pretty professional overall with their proposal and response to our questions. I guess Mr. Sears actually now stepped out on this issue, I think, from a process standpoint. But I do think that he was raising an important concern about impacts on neighbors with grading activities. So we might want to think about adding a condition about that if there's not one suggested by staff already. That's all.
Further discussion from the board.
We do have we had a hand raised from Tom Daniels as a call-in.
We'll hear from Mr. Staples first.
Yeah, I just had a couple of things I wanted to add to this. I do like the project. I guess I was a little concerned about the ordinance and how this particular project is subverting the Ag Committee. And so I reached out to some members of the Ag Committee just to get their thoughts on this. And the feedback that I got was overwhelmingly positive about this, as far as everybody seemed to be at least not against it, which was good. So that makes me feel a little bit better about this. And then I guess when I was reading through all of the plans, this is a minor point, but when I was looking through some things, I was just alarmed at the amount of waste that like the packaging from the solar panels that would be produced by this project. I believe it was like 1.2 tons or something like that of wood and cardboard and so forth. And the plan does say that they're going to, reuse and recycle as they can, but I would just, strongly encourage that they do that, because that's a lot. And then, further, I would also say, in general, when you're clearing 16 acres of trees, I always like to encourage, I would not put a stipulation on this, but I always like to encourage that if somebody clears that much acreage of trees, that they consider replanting some at some other location if they have those means. So I would just put that recommendation out there, but I wouldn't make it part of any formal thing that we do here. So that's all I had.
Thank you. Anything else from the board? Okay, no, that's changed. So we had one of the attendees that was raising their hand. It appears, they're back. I think it is possible for us to move to hear from, I think this is a member of the public, to hear from this person. But we would need a motion to do so.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Bergeron?
Yes.
Mr. Engler?
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan?
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Yes.
Mr. Martelli?
Yes.
Mr. Staples?
Yes.
And Chairman Duke?
Yes. Mr. Daniels.
Hi, so my name's Tom Daniels. I'm actually an engineer with TRC. And I just wanted to address the comment about the grading and the downgrading of butter. This project will have a site law permit through MDP, and as a standard condition, there will be a third-party inspector required to visit the site throughout construction to make sure that the contractor is managing runoff in an effective manner. So with the comment on clearing and grading, I just wanted to throw that out there to ease the board's mind a little bit there.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
So public comment is open. Are there any other members of the public that wish to comment? Seeing none, I'll need a motion to close public comment.
Motion to close public comment.
I'll
Thank
second that.
Mr. Bergeron,
Yes.
Mr. Engler,
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan,
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc,
Yep.
Mr. Martelli,
Yes.
Mr. Staples,
Yes.
and Chairman Duval.
Yes. Okay, further discussion on this issue. Yes, Mr. Engler.
Just to say that I had suggested making some kind of condition around the grading and runoff and abutters and stuff. But all I was going to suggest was that staff ask them for a plan. I mean, they'll just basically say, well, there's this third party inspector that's going to be keeping an eye on things. So I think my concern is addressed. I'm not sure about Mr. Sear. So I'd be ready to approve this as is personally. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Engler. Any other thoughts or comments from the board?
No.
Mr. Staples?
Yeah, so I guess I would just add to this that, sometimes when you do projects like this, there are some unintended consequences with erosion and so forth. And I know that they're taking some considerations in when they're first planning and building this, but will there be any sort of further erosion studies as the project moves on, like maybe year 2, year 5, that kind of thing? I would just hate for any kind of issues to occur so close to the river. And I know there's plenty of land on the other side of Riverside Drive, but there was a pretty bad erosion project that happened in Durham, a few years back. I know we're not looking at anything that bad, but there's a lot of bad stuff that could happen with erosion that close to the river.
Staff, do you have any?
Yeah, so they provided the vegetative maintenance plan to make sure that the vegetation remains maintained. And they do have, what did they say? Sorry, lost my train of thought for a second. I apologize. They're having their inspector come out and look at the site. So I'm not sure the frequency of that inspection. That's something that we could certainly check with them. They're supposed to be, before they leave the site, they're supposed to be leaving it in meadow conditions. So they shouldn't be leaving any areas of open soils. They have their plan for the topsoil maintenance. So I don't anticipate there being any areas of open soils left on the site. But we can certainly make that a condition that somebody come out every year or so to check on the site and make sure that there are no erosion issues there, depending on the frequency of their inspector and how often they come out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more thoughts, comments from members of the planning board?
No.
If there are none, I think we would be looking for a motion. Mr. Engler?
I make a motion to approve the site plan special exception by Auburn Renewables to construct a 35-acre, 5-megawatt solar array on 2 parcels totaling approximately 82.1 acres at 1115 Riverside Drive, PIDs 162-001 and 137-028 in the Agricultural and Resource Protection Zoning District.
Second.
Any discussion of the motion? Okay.
Mr. Bergeron,
Pass, or yes.
Mr. Engler,
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan,
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mr. Martelli,
Yes.
Mr. Staples,
Yes.
and Chairman Duval.
Yes. All right, that concludes our first item. We now have some personnel things to do. 2 full members have joined the meeting since that initial item began. And if we can have them introduce themselves, and this means that associate members Bergeron and Staples will be able to participate in discussion, but will not be able to vote or make motions. So, Mr. Sear?
Again, Evan Sear. What else would you like, Chairman?
No, that's good. Mr. Carroll?
Dan Carroll.
Thank you. All right, so we're now proceeding to the next item on the agenda, which is a planned unit development public hearing on behalf of Mystique Way, proposing to amend the site plan special exception approved by the planning board on April 14th of 2020 to develop a planned unit development consisting of 18 buildings split into 10 units in the industrial zoning district.
So most of the board members remember back in April that the planning board approved the 14 new industrial cannabis cultivation and manufacturing buildings on Mystique Way. The total number of buildings that were approved were 18. There were 7 conditions at the time that the planning board put on the approval, and we listed those in the staff report for this month. And there was also 1 waiver that was granted for the off-street loading requirements. So they're back with a plan revision to develop the property into a planned unit development. Everything on the site plan is the same as what was approved back in April, except they condensed 2 of the buildings down to 1. So now there's 18 total buildings instead of 19. And the proposal also includes grouping those 18 buildings into 10 units. 2 of the units will contain 2 buildings, 1 contains 8 buildings, and all of the others each contain 1 building, and the area surrounding the building, also known as the building envelope. In the staff report, we provided a breakdown of the units, buildings, and the square footage. The items that the planning board previously approved for stormwater, roadway utility designs, erosion control, and access are all still relevant with this proposal. The main difference, aside from the units, is that planned unit developments have their own set of standards that have to be reviewed by the planning board. And unfortunately, the ordinance groups all planned unit development standards into 1 category. So some standards like pedestrian and bicycle traffic are not really applicable to industrial type of planned unit developments. So there's a few conditions from the April approval that we recommend the planning board consider for this review as well. The first one was just making sure that there are no vehicles parked on Mystique Way, except in emergency situations. I think that's still relevant here. Making sure the engineering department has signed off on all of the stormwater reviews and that the inspection fees are paid before construction. I know the Auburn Water and Sewer Department is still looking for an easement for the public water main on Mystique Way. And I believe they were working through that. I'm just not sure if that has been completed as of yet. And the fire department will have to sign off on any issues about access and hydrant distances. The applicant provided plans to the fire department back in April, and they provided them again, but we just haven't seen that final okay on those plans. So we just want to make sure that that's addressed before they start the project. And lastly is the addressing plan, which is already under review by city staff. So the only other consideration that we had for this month was about the loading space waiver that was granted. So the waiver was granted to not require loading spaces on Mystique Way because of the types of vehicles that were going to be used for deliveries for cannabis type businesses, which are mainly box trucks. If the units are owned individually and sold, any industrial use that's permitted in the industrial district could use those buildings. So it's possible that they have delivery trucks that don't fit into a typical parking space like a box truck. So we had just added a suggested condition for the planning board to think about that if any proposed use of a building that would require loading spaces beyond just a typical box truck be reviewed administratively by the planning staff. And lastly, we did get some comments from the police department. We've taken them into consideration and looked at the access to and from the site. They were hoping to have a sign only allowing for right turns out of the site. We realize that those signs can't be enforced by the police department, and it could potentially create some traffic issues down the road. So we're just hoping to address that concern through a city process with DOT. That's all that we have on that one.
Great, thank you. Any questions for staff? Yes, Mr. Sear.
Yeah, so I guess my first question is going to be why, and perhaps I'll say this for the applicant, but I'd be interested in knowing why such a change. With regard to traffic, the police department made it quite clear in their comments that there's concern, and there was concern previously, and I think that concern's heightened given that we're not looking at one owner now. So you're looking at multiple owners in the space with employees for each owner, and that in and of itself is going to increase traffic. So if staff could speak to the implications of that. Also, why staff feels now that if this is going to be a sort of condominium style planned unit development, that loading docks are no longer, loading docks would not be required. We waived that under the understanding that this was a singular owner with these buildings being used for a singular purpose. But if there are multiple owners, there's no reason to believe that anymore. So why staff was made their comment with regard to their recommendations. I'll stop there. I have lots of questions. I'll let you. I'll breathe for a second so you can go ahead and start to address some of that.
Yeah. So as far as the loading, we were under the impression that when it was initially approved in April that there was going to be one owner, and that one owner had plans for a cannabis type of development. Now that those plans have changed, we're recommending that the planning board maybe reconsider that waiver on the loading space requirements, just because it's possible that any industrial use can go into those buildings, and it may be something that would require more than just a typical parking space. So the waiver was granted back in April, but it's just something that the planning board may want to consider with the different owners that are going to be potentially in the project. As far as the change, they may be able to speak more to why they wanted this change, but I know that they wanted the flexibility to be able to have multiple owners in the development as opposed to just one owner that would be in charge of renting out all of the buildings. And then the traffic is something that we definitely need to work with the police department on. I just know that from site visits, it's not something that can necessarily be addressed by the planning board, and Eric might be able to speak a little bit more to it, but our thought process was that a right turn only sign may create traffic issues down the road and it's not enforceable. So we may want to come up with a different solution that may happen outside of the planning board process.
One of the things that we talked to the police department about is that the right turn only signs, when they're on a private driveway like this one is, Ruper's is another example that actually has one. They're not legally enforceable by the police department when they're addressing a private turn movement. And the other part of it with this particular driveway is if you think through how somebody entering or exiting that site, if they want to take a left out of there and they can't, say they're headed for Mechanic Falls after buying some marijuana, they now would, in order to follow the rules, they would have to take a right. They would probably turn around at Garfield Road. Backwoods is the first kind of commercial or public street to turn around at, and then re-enter Minot Avenue. And that it potentially creates more conflicts than a left turn out of the site would have. I think long term, we need to work with DOT on maybe looking at turning movements on that section of Minot Avenue, and that might be a good candidate for a road diet potentially, a single lane in each direction with a center left turn lane instead of the 4 lanes that we have in that outer stretch of Minot Avenue.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Martelli?
Yeah. I don't know if this question may be better suited for the owner or what, but in the paperwork, it shows that they want to put up buildings that are in a greenhouse style, which is a thin steel galvanized tubing frame and 2 layers of plastic with an air bubble in between. And in their pictures here, they're showing, several buildings put together. Are they going to be putting buildings together like this, and have they considered the snow load on it?
I know that's something that will be looked at during the building permit process, is the snow load piece of it. The plan unit development ordinance requires that they provide architectural details of what the buildings themselves will look like. So I think they may have provided a couple of examples of what they're thinking they're going to have out there just to meet that ordinance requirement, but they can definitely give us more specifics on that.
All right. Very good.
And so far, Stephen, the buildings out there are some that are connected with a valley between the 2 structures.
Right.
They are engineered structures and they have been able to meet the building code. They're not your typical poly greenhouse for as far as what they've built so far. They're an engineered steel I-beam structure with a plastic covering.
All right, very good.
Additional questions? Mr. Sear, you said you had many.
Yes, I do. I'll say that with regard to the traffic, I'd like to come back to that later. So in the report, there's a discussion of a parking spot now being present at each building. On the plan that I have in front of me, unless something's changed, the southerlymost building in what is now going to be considered Unit 1 still has no parking space adjacent to the building. There's a turnaround close to the building, which I assume would then be de facto used as a parking space, but that turnaround exists for emergency vehicles. So I wouldn't want to see someone using that as a parking space. So I guess if staff could sort of speak to that, there just seemed to be, and maybe I misread, there seemed to be some incongruence between what was said and what I'm seeing on the plan.
So, Mr. Sear, I had the same issue. And then if you look at where the road dead ends into that unit 1,
Yeah.
that building, they actually put parking spaces right in the dead end.
Yeah. It took me a while to see those too.
Okay.
I think when we had made that condition that 2 parking spaces be close to each of the buildings, we were really concerned about, like, for example, the building that's part of Unit 1 that's not clustered with all of the other buildings that are associated with Unit 1, and making sure that there's parking spaces there so people aren't walking down the road or parking on the side of Mystique Way or these little off roads.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I see those. Yeah, they're a little less than impressive, but I got them. And finally, in a response from the applicant dated April 9th, I'm looking at a number 2. There were questions that were raised by staff. Number 2 is regarding buffers. And the response from the applicant is that a 15-foot wide landscaped buffer has been added to all areas where a natural existing buffer does not exist. Evergreen trees are proposed as requested, and I'm inclined to believe them. However, on the site plan that I have, I see no trees on site anywhere. So I was wondering, is the applicant assuming that they can utilize trees on a neighboring parcel to act as a buffer for their own parcel? I mean, that would be highly unorthodox, but.
Yeah, it looks like they've got a 15-foot landscaping buffer area that's shown on the plan.
Can you explain where you're seeing that?
It's down, well, you see where those 2 arrows are pointing at the bottom of Unit 1? It's like a hatched area.
Okay, I see. So it's that. I guess the issue is here. That is not normally how we see those buffers identified on these plans. So there's a buffer. Okay, so it looks like there's a buffer to the southwest. What about to the northwest, northeast, and southeast? Again, is there vegetation on other lots that they're assuming works as their own buffer?
It's possible, and the ordinance requires that they buffer the side and rear lot lines. So I'm trying to remember if we defined it based off of Minot or if we defined it based off of Mystique Way. So it looks like the common area that they have that looks like wetlands has been buffered, and then the only other side lot line that we would be talking about would be the area that would be abutting the DJ Properties LLC. If they don't have to buffer the front setback, which the industrial district doesn't require that they buffer in the front.
Well, I guess that would be my question. What did staff use as the rear and side setback?
Yeah, so I believe Mystique Way was the front setback. Rear was where you see that 15-foot buffer, and then the sides are the sides of the development. We've got the wetlands on the common area, and then.
So then, not to interrupt, but then wouldn't one expect a buffer along the property to the? I'm looking at southeast K&S Realty LLC.
I believe that's the area where they're showing the wetlands that they consider to be their buffer area.
Well, I mean the ordinance
I
is
understand what you're
a
saying.
visual
Yes.
buffer. It's not land in between. It's meant to be a visual buffer.
So
Yeah.
those areas will be left to grow in a natural state, though, and unimpacted. Planting would actually require them to go in and dig holes to plant trees.
So what sort of vegetation exists there currently, Eric, that would be equivalent to the type of vegetation that we would expect for a buffer?
I can, let me see if I can pull up an aerial photo while you guys continue your discussion.
Okay, Mr. Martelli.
Megan, along Mystique Way, in reference to Mr. Sears' question, is the setback figured from the center of the road, approximately 25 feet from the center of the road to the building, or curb, I should say?
Let's see. They can reduce the setbacks.
That would be the city-owned property that they could.
I don't believe Mystique Way is city-owned. They weren't. The city isn't planning on accepting Mystique Way as a city way.
All right.
Yeah.
It's a private road.
Yeah, the engineering department specifically said that they don't want Mystique Way accepted as a public way.
All right, so they're responsible for all snow plowing and maintenance. Am I correct?
Correct. Yeah, and unless they build the road to specific standards that the engineering department was looking for, they said that they will not be accepting it, and those standards seem to be pretty stringent. So that's something they're going to discuss.
All right, so then the building setback from the road would be different than it would be on a public road.
The building setback on the road. Sorry, I was getting to that on the plan.
Yeah, I don't see a dimension, but it looks like 10 feet, from the road curb back to the edge of the building on Mystique Way.
Yeah, and their setbacks may be based off of Minot too. I know we had discussed that early on.
Yeah, that's a public road. Yeah.
Right. But we were looking at it as one lot as opposed to a planned unit development.
All right.
So the entire lot, the setbacks for that entire lot were based off of Minot.
All right, very good.
Okay, other questions? If you have one, my screen is frozen right now, so if you have a question, please go ahead and ask it. All right, can you all hear me?
You're a little echoey, but I can hear you.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to.
That was really bad.
Hang on. Now that's better?
Much better.
Okay.
I got your thumb.
Yeah, I got that too. Do-do-do-do. Okay, sorry, I had to switch devices. Are there any further questions for staff?
Regarding the traffic issue of traffic on Minot Avenue, I don't see there being any problems exactly with this street, but exiting this street onto Minot Avenue, I think, does present some concern. And what Mr. Cousins was saying as far as, a potential road diet on Minot Avenue, I think there's a lot of merit to that. Could we potentially make a review of by the Complete Streets Committee one of the potential, things to tie on to this as maybe a restriction or in some way.
Well, I can answer that question for you, Mr. Staples. So, no, we would not make that a condition of approval for this because it's not specific to the parcel. It's not an improvement on the parcel itself. However, the planning board in the past, when things like this have come up, it is within our purview to draft a recommendation to the city council that they seek information or a report. So to answer your question, yes and no. Yes, we can do it. No, we cannot make it a condition of that.
And one other option as well, if the board really saw merit in that, exploring the road diet on Minot Avenue. As you know from past projects, we lose about 50% of the tax revenues from new value that's created to the county tax and the state revenue shift. When our value increases, we get less from the state and revenue sharing. There is the possibility of doing tax increment financing and capturing some of that value to pay for an improvement on Minot Avenue, or to pay to study it at least, as well as potentially paying for new public safety buildings as a new option with tax increment financing. And that wouldn't be a condition, but it could be part of a recommendation to the council separate from this project review.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Martelli.
Yeah, Eric, maybe you can answer this question. Reggie, outdoor lawn care place there, that's just down the road from this. Have they had any serious accidents with their place?
I'm not aware of any specifically there, but there are a number of rear end collisions along Minot Avenue in that stretch every year when somebody stopped to turn left.
Maybe we could get a DOT sign up there, something about an entry up ahead.
Turning traffic or something like that. I think that's certainly a possibility.
Yep.
Okay, any further questions from the board for staff?
No.
If not, I think we can invite the applicant to join us.
And Mr. Chairman, I did pull up an aerial shot of the site. And I think it's in an effort to try to address Evan's concerns. We could talk to the applicant about it, but I would guess most of the perimeter of the site is wetlands other than the buffer side. We may be able to get a commitment that they let that grow in a natural state and continue to allow the trees to exist there.
Okay, Mr. Sear.
Yes, thank you very much for pulling up the aerial. The aerial and the site plan don't quite match. The site plan shows just open wetland to the south and southeast, whereas the aerial clearly shows, if not sizable trees, at least trees. And so thank you very much, Mr. Cousins. That does a lot to answer my question.
Okay, so with that, I think, yeah, we'd like to bring the applicant in.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Hello?
Hi.
Hi, I'll start off. My name is Jeff Amos. I'm an engineer with Teradyne Consultants, and I'm here on behalf of Sean O'Brien and Mystique Way. And to start, I'll just talk about the brief nature of this submittal. So as most of you remember, this was here before you in April. It's important to note that the road infrastructure, as well as all utilities, building locations, except for one of them, the buildings proximity to Mystique Way, everything is the same as it was on that initial plan. And during that original submittal, perhaps we weren't clear enough, but there are already multiple owners and businesses on site. So the buildings the photos that we sent you, as far as potential models for how these buildings look, those are the buildings that are on units 1, 6, and 7. So you only have building photos of the buildings that are already on site, and nothing theoretical. That's what's there on site. So as far as I'll step through your questions one at a time as I have written them down, kind of going from most recent to past. The issue of the forested buffer. Thank you for bringing up the aerial photo. I think that answers some of the questions, but during the last approval in April, we did speak to that. We agreed to add a buffer where the trees had been currently cut. So the site, even though the aerial shows the area as forested, the site was heavily cut. And so it's mostly an open area. The only area that's not the case is right along the northwest boundary along the DJ Properties side. I'm not sure if you have that plan up. Basically, the northeast and southwest sides have an existing tree stand pretty vigorously buffering the site. And so there are trees shown on our proposed construction plans that we had as part of the previous submittal, which covered the construction of the road, stormwater ponds, utilities, and those things. So those trees are on the current construction plans. So we don't normally show proposed trees on a buffer on a plan like this, but we certainly can if the board wants to make it completely clear what's happening there. But the trees are shown. I think it's perhaps every 10 feet staggered along the whole way down that rear property line. Each proposed building, we were asked to provide 2 parking spaces in front of each building. It's important to note again that remote building in Unit 1 does have 2 spaces there. That's all one business that's going to own Unit 1 right there. And those spaces would only be used during the wintertime as they're shuttling people back and forth between buildings. That they don't, the same crew would be up, manning several different buildings and rotating between buildings during their shifts. So whether they walk back and forth or park, that's not an area being open to the public. So the applicant believed that the 2 spaces are right in front would be easily accessible, and folks could turn around and back up into the turnaround and head back out towards Mystique Way. As far as the employees, it wouldn't be confusing. Let's see here. We'll save traffic for the end. So as far as this, the way we view this submittal was really this is about lines on a page. Nothing on the ground is going to be built differently. Nothing is going to look differently or function differently than what's already approved. The applicant intended to, and already has, different owners. There's a different owner that owns Unit 7 and 6 versus the applicant. So that they were really what this was about. They were exploring different ways as far as leasing or selling if they would own their own buildings and lease the land underneath it. But it was really under the previous submittal. But this submittal is based upon buyer feedback that they wanted to be able to buy their own, the land that the building is set upon. So which is why we've provided unit areas around each of the proposed buildings. So that's the intent of this plan. It's not to change anything on the ground. It's just to allow the applicant to actually sell the unit rather than, than have a lease agreement for the land underneath. And he can speak to that more if you have more questions about that. As far as we will be adding the conditions of approval to this plan when it gets recorded. And one of the conditions, one thing that's been asked for,
It is not our day.
Think we lost him.
Say I lost audio.
He's frozen.
Oh, well.
Next.
I suspect he'll try to rejoin.
I don't see him yet on the attendees list. I know that we had somebody else having trouble and they ended up being denied for trying too many times, but they've since called in. I don't know if Sean might be able to speak to the ownership questions that you guys had while we wait.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep, so as Jeff pointed out, the only objective here was to allow third parties to purchase the land instead of just leasing it.
Okay. Well, so I think at this point we can open up and members of the board have any questions for the applicant.
I have a question.
Yep.
It seems that the traffic concern from everybody seems to be employees coming and going. How many potential owners are we looking at, and what do we figure each owner would have for employees? And what would the total employees be once everything condominiumized out?
They provided that information to us in the April submittal, but it was based on having all one owner. So
Right.
That's a good point. The applicant, I'm not sure if Sean or if we have to wait for Jeff to be able to elaborate a little more on how that might look depending on how they sell the buildings.
The number of employees wouldn't change and the amount of traffic wouldn't either. The intention from the original submittal was for each of these to be managed by independent growers. So it would have been third parties anyway. So it's the same people or same companies, just now having the option of buying the land instead of just leasing it. So it's the same number of employees, same number of cars. The traffic study from the original submittal is still the same.
Do we know how many employees that was then?
I don't have it in front of me, and hopefully Jeff gets reconnected. He'll have it.
I want to say like 25. I thought I remembered seeing. I can pull it up on.
I mean, to me, that just doesn't sound like a lot of traffic? Everybody's not coming and going at the same time, or I'm just thinking of other businesses in that area.
Mr. Martelli, do you have a question while we're waiting for that answer?
No, it's a answer to Mr. Carroll's question. And back in April, that was a question that I asked, was how many employees or how many people would be coming and going. And it was stated that it would be 25. So.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I remember too.
Thank you.
Mr. Bergeron?
The only additional traffic would be those box trucks delivering things like soils or nutrients. And I would wonder, I guess I could, maybe the applicant can speak to this. Would that be coordinated between the buildings and the owners? Or they, all those managing separately, be ordering their supplies at separate times?
So we all use the same suppliers. They're a small handful, and they only deliver on certain days. So they aggregate all of their orders together. So they would deliver to all of us on the same day.
Thank you.
So I apologize. It looks like it was 40 employees in the April submittal. I'm not sure if you can see the screen. This is what was provided for the owners of the buildings, and then the number of employees, 40 total employees. And then they also had talked about deliveries that would add additional trips, but they don't expect the deliveries to occur during the peak hour. So estimated 50 peak hour trips is what they were thinking with the April submittal, and it sounds like that hasn't changed.
Further questions for the applicant? Mr. Martelli.
Yeah, I want to clarify on the people coming and going. Now these grow houses are going to be employee operated, so there'll be 40 people there. Are the public going to be coming and going on top of this, or are these grow houses supplying for the shops in town?
That's why we required last month that they submit a traffic study, and that we added a condition that only one retail use be allowed on the site. So they did provide a traffic study for one building to be used for retail, and that's it. So all of the other buildings will have to remain as industrial, either cultivation, manufacturing, so employee or members of the public.
All right, very good.
Megan, does that mean that they did not supply you with a full traffic study?
We did not get. Yeah, we got. I believe it was a letter from. Was it Tim Brayley or Bray from Traffic Solutions? I mean, it was based on that one retail use.
So it was not a complete traffic study for the site. It was for a singular use on the site?
Correct. I'm trying to see.
Looks like I'm back now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just picking up from what I heard from the tail end there, the traffic study did cover all 19 buildings that were on the site plan. So it included the same square footage of building that is on the current plan, as well as the 1,100 square feet of the retail center. So the current plan is captured in that traffic analysis as far as total trips. It's based upon square footage, so that number wouldn't have changed.
And that's that we would ask for that type of analysis. If it exceeds 100. And a permit required.
So just so the board knows, when I was, I guess, frozen off, I was talking away for probably a few minutes. I don't know if you, I don't know what you said, obviously. So if you have more questions, feel free to ask them, and I'll try to cover ground however you see fit.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Mr. Amos and Mr. O'Brien? Okay, seeing none, we'll say thank you. And we'll move on to the next phase of this hearing, which is the public comment.
I make a motion to open the public comment section of the public hearing.
Thank you.
Second.
Do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Engler.
Mr. Carroll? Mr. Sear?
Yes.
Mr. Engler?
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan?
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Yes.
Mr. Martelli?
Yes.
And Chairman Duval?
Yes. All right, if there are any members of the public who wish to comment on this project, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none. Do I have a motion to close public comment?
So moved.
And is there a second?
Mr. Carroll? Mr. Sear?
Yes.
Mr. Engler?
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan?
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Yep.
Mr. Martelli?
Yes.
And Chairman Duval?
Yes. Okay, discussion.
Yeah, I guess, may I start?
Yes, please.
I guess it was traffic to me was a fundamentally different issue when it was a singular owner. And it has less to do with what the current proposed use is. When we approve these things, we're approving them for future use as well. And when I look at this, I say, yeah, in its current use, if all things are going to remain the same, we didn't have an issue with the traffic last month, and we shouldn't have an issue with the traffic this month. However, by splitting this into 10 lots, essentially, we could see 10 individual sales, and we could see 10 individual sales within 1 month of the approval and recording of record. And so I guess I understand and agree that the current use doesn't present a traffic problem, but because we are looking at 10 different owners, that's much more difficult to sort of predict how that use could change. And it could change essentially in 10 different ways because there will be 10 different owners potentially. So there's that piece that I wanted to say. I guess I would just want to defer to staff and make sure, are they in concurrence that the traffic study they received was a full traffic study? Because if staff was not convinced that what they received was a full traffic study, I would want to include that as a condition on this approval. If we make an approval, that there would be an additional traffic study that meets staff's definition of a full study. And I guess I'll leave it at that for now. But that's where I would like to talk about. I guess actually I'd like to talk about the loading docks too, again, because there could be 10 potential sales. And I understand that there's a condition that any use requiring a loading dock would have to go to planning staff, but I don't like that because that means that planning staff would be looking at whether or not what would normally be a permitted use is applicable in a building simply because the building was built without the required infrastructure for a commercial entity in the zone. And that, I don't know, that doesn't sit well with me, but so I'll leave it there and hear what other people have to say.
Okay. Mr. Martelli?
I agree with Mr. Sear on everything, and I also would like to add into that the roadway in the agreement needs to be under condition of not being a public road, but being a private road, that they will maintain it to standards that, you know, the DOT recommends. So.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, if I could try to address Evan's concern.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Cousins.
We have a traffic analysis that from a licensed traffic engineer that estimates the amount of traffic that the proposed 19 buildings would generate. So I think we're comfortable that the estimate should be accurate for the current uses. And I would just say that if they do propose a different use in the future, then as part of their change of use permit, we can require a new traffic estimate for whatever use is proposed. And if they do get to the point where they would trigger improvements, we have a process that can require that.
Thank you. Anyone else from the planning board? Mr. Engler, you have anything? No? Ms. LeBlanc?
I do not.
Mr. Carroll.
I guess I'll add that I don't see this as a big pivot from what we looked at. Because I had understand that there were going to be multiple business owners operating at the development. And you know, I thought that's why we were so insistent that only the one business could operate a retail license so that we could keep a handle on the traffic. As long as that condition remains imposed, I don't think that this should produce a big change in the traffic volume seen there.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Carroll, do you have any thoughts? You're muted. You're still muted.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, no questions here at this time. Thank you.
Yep. Mr. Finnegan?
Nothing on my end at this time. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Sear.
Yeah, so I'm looking, and I guess I don't know why this didn't occur to me before Mr. Martelli made his comment, and I wanted to wait for it to go around the horn before I jump back in. So we're looking at a private road, which has to be privately maintained. There's area marked as common area. And I guess my question to staff is, does that mean that all owners who have a parcel in this plan unit development would also own some portion of that common parcel? And the next question would be, normally in cases like this with a private road, we would ask for some sort of agreement as to how this is going to be maintained. Like what exists to make sure that this private road will be maintained. And normally there'd be some sort of an agreement that would be handed in that we'd be able to review and see. So does that exist?
We do have the maintenance responsibilities that they provided this month, and it includes those common areas, common elements, and it also includes the road.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Just to mirror what Mr. Sear was just saying. So will there be a road association that all of the owners would have to be a part of? Do we know?
Sorry, I'm trying to look to see who's on the signature for this. Yeah, it looks like they've got the 10 unit numbers, and then they've got unit percentage interest, and then a vote section. So they'll be divvying it out that way.
Thank you.
Thank you. So personally, I just wanted to echo the issue about the loading dock. The possibility of future uses that are outside of the current use make that a bit of a problem for me. So I just echoing Mr. Sear's concern about that. Any other comments?
Yeah.
Mr. Angler, I think you froze. Aside from Mr. Angler.
I'd like to get either your or Evan's thoughts on what you would like to see as far as loading docks go.
That's an excellent question. I think given the nature of the buildings, I don't think that they can build loading docks. They're not built as industrial commercial style buildings that, you know, have an 8-foot footer or a 6-foot footer or a 4-foot footer around them. You know, they're built as greenhouse style buildings, which would obviously limit the future use as well. I guess I personally would hate to impose that we require them to build those loading docks. To me, it would be almost a bridge to nowhere. There's no point in building a standard loading dock at a building where the loading dock itself can't be used for the building because the loading dock is well above grade for the building. My real concern came from condition number 7 in the staff report. Any proposed industrial use with loading space requirements beyond a typical box truck shall be reviewed administratively by planning staff. That doesn't really get at the idea of the loading dock, and that it also, in my mind, sort of it had staff reviewing whether or not a business could go into this space, and I would have a problem with that if the business was already a permitted use. If the business was a permitted use in that zone and would not otherwise be required any review at staff level, they shouldn't have this review because we allowed these buildings to have no loading docks. I don't know what the solution is, but it just doesn't. I don't like it.
And just to add some clarification, when we drafted that condition, we weren't specifically thinking of a loading dock. We were just thinking of a designated parking space for the loading vehicles to park to get off of the road. So I don't think that condition is trying to get at they must add a loading dock, whether it can be used or not. So the intention behind that was to make sure that they at least have space for the vehicles to get off of Mystique Way.
Look, Megan, I guess I took that condition to say not whether or not they would be required to build a loading dock, but whether or not staff would allow a use at that building because it did not have a loading dock.
No, that's definitely not what was meant with the condition. The condition was just to make sure that they have space for the larger vehicles that are bigger than a box truck to park to get off the road.
If the intent was for staff to be able to say, if they're going to need more space, then we need to be able to go and review that and say that they need to make more space. I would feel much more comfortable now looking at the plan, just putting that as a condition that any change in use from the current use would require the creation of a loading space at each building. That, to me, that would be a much easier way to go about it. It wouldn't require staff review to decide whether or not it's needed. It would just trigger it automatically.
And it looks like, in looking at the plan, really the only units that are not laid out to accommodate a formal loading space, I know they're not designated on the other ones, but there's areas that can be used for loading that are off the private road. 2, 3, and 4 are really the only ones that don't have an area that could be used as a loading area. Maybe there could be a shared loading area alongside Mystique Way where a truck could pull over to serve 2 and 4.
Okay, yeah. I think that's a good point. I guess, so as I'm a verbal processor, those of you that have been on the board long enough know this, so I apologize, but you get to hear my thought process. I'm thinking instead of number 7, I would be happier in addressing the loading dock issue by creating a condition that says the applicant needs to provide an updated site plan for staff approval prior to final approval on the site plan, indicating feasible locations for future loading zones. So like they don't have to build the loading zone, but it has to be identified on the site plan where they can go for those buildings. And if staff determines that a shared loading zone is appropriate, that's fine. I'm willing to delegate that authority to staff. That would make me feel better with regard to the loading zone.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Martelli?
I just want to support Mr. Sear on his explanation there. And I wanted to get back to saying that a loading zone might be a better wording rather than a loading dock. At least they would have an area where they could load and unload product. So a zone might be easier to work with.
So I have a clarification question about if somebody has to build an increased loading zone. As I recall, this from April, this particular application was right at the edge of if they did any more work, they would trigger a complete stormwater reassessment of the stormwater plan. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I had asked that question and I realized I just got a response to that today. They had 10,000 square feet of additional impervious area that could be used by the area that's containing units 1 through 5 and 8 through 10. And then the area that's contained by units 6 and 7 has 5,000 square feet. So 10,000 square feet of additional area is available before they trigger that stormwater review.
Okay, so it was 6 and 7 had 5,000 and the other units?
Yeah, so 6 and 7 had 5,000 and the other units had 10,000.
Okay. Thank you. So it feels like we are converging on, or we are getting to a point where we're feeling like we have some idea about how we want to move forward. Does anybody disagree with that?
I agree and just want to mirror what a couple others were saying. Using the word zone in place of the word dock after the word loading seems to clarify quite a bit.
Okay, so given that, I think at this point to move forward, we need a motion.
So, but before I try to make a motion, then looking in the staff report at staff's suggested conditions, were there any suggestions for alterations to what staff had put here other than changing that word in condition 7?
Mr. Sear, did you have precise wording?
Yeah, in my opinion, it would make sense not to actually strike 7, and say that the condition would be that the applicant will provide an updated site plan indicating future loading zones for each building to be approved by staff.
Thank you.
So the loading zones don't need to be built now. They need to be identified where they'd go, and the staff gets to decide whether or not that's an appropriate spot for it.
All right, I'll do best. Other thoughts? Okay. I will make a motion to approve the industrial planned unit development for the creation of 10 units and a total of 18 buildings located on Mystique Way, PID 206-058 in the industrial zoning district with the following conditions. 1, except in emergency situations, no vehicles shall be parked on Mystique Way unless in a space. 2, no more than one retail use shall be on the site unless approval is granted by the planning board. 3, before the start of construction, all applicable bonding and inspection fees shall be paid and the engineering department shall sign off on the stormwater review. 4, a 15-foot easement shall be provided to the Auburn Water and Sewer Department and recorded in a deed for the public water main on Mystique Way. 5, all concerns raised by the fire department regarding access and fire hydrant distances shall be addressed before building permits are issued, and a letter from the fire department shall be provided to the planning department. 6, an addressing plan shall be approved before building permits are issued. And 7, any future proposed change of industrial uses shall require presenting a site plan to staff, and staff should examine the loading space requirements of those future uses as a part of their review.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Can I offer a friendly amendment, Mr. Engler?
You may, sir.
Okay. I would ask that we amend your condition 7 to not be applicable to any future proposed industrial use, but that the applicant provide a current updated site plan to staff indicating where future loading zones may be located for each building.
I accept Mr. Sears' amendment.
Okay, so we have a motion.
I will second.
We have a second. Is there any discussion of the motion? Hearing none, we'll vote.
Mr. Carroll,
Yes.
Mr. Sear,
Yes.
Mr. Engler. Yes. Mr. Finnegan,
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mr. Martelli,
Yes.
and Chairman Duval.
Yes. All right, great. Thank you. We will now move on to item 5 on the agenda. Special exception public hearing on the proposed expansion of Future Guard at 101 Merrill Road to construct a 3,258 square foot main entrance addition with adjustments to parking on both sides, et cetera, et cetera. Staff?
Yes, so we provided a breakdown in your staff report of previous expansions that were reviewed by the planning board and administratively by staff for the Future Guard project. With the last expansion that was reviewed in October of 2019, we reviewed all of the parking requirements, the density, the setbacks, and the landscaping. And all of those requirements were addressed during the October of 2019 approval. And they're still addressed with this proposed expansion. There is an increase in impervious area. However, back in October, when we were reviewing all of this, DEP required a calculation of stormwater treatment for redevelopment projects. And once a certain threshold is reached by the project, then they would require them to treat the stormwater. And with these proposed improvements, they still aren't required to treat anything on the site. There were some concerns raised by abutters in October regarding the Hotel Merrill Road intersection. At the time, the planning board drafted a recommendation to the city council that this area be looked at by the city, and I believe this is already underway with the city council. So I think this is a pretty straightforward expansion of the building. So we recommend that the planning board approve the expansion with those two conditions that are listed in your staff report about making sure the inspection fees are paid before construction and that the airport is notified of any cranes that are higher than 75 feet.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on this for staff at this point? No? All right, so if the applicant is here, we'd like to invite them in to.
Hi, this is Mike Gatto. I think the staff report is complete. Sorry I don't have video and can't join you tonight, but hopefully you can hear me. And at this point, I'll just answer any questions that the public or that the board may have.
Any questions from the board for Mr. Gatto?
None here.
Okay, seeing none, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Gatto.
Thank you.
And we can now move to the public comment portion of the hearing.
I make a motion to open the public comment section of the hearing.
Okay, I have a motion. I have a second. At this time, if there are any members of the public that wish to comment, please raise your hand.
Well, it was anonymous. Yeah, unanimous, right? It was.
Oh, right. We got to vote again. Sorry.
Sorry, my dogs are going crazy right now too. Mr. Carroll? Mr. Sear?
Yes.
Mr. Engler?
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan?
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Yes.
Mr. Martelli?
Yes.
And Chairman Duval?
Yes.
So yeah, I'm a fortune teller, Mr. Duval. I told you it was unanimous.
I know. I'll be happy when we don't have to do this over Zoom.
I agree.
Second tap.
Yeah, right. So at this point, if there are any members of the public who wish to comment on this project, please raise your hand and we will invite you in to speak.
The only remaining members in the meeting are here either for this project, Mike Gatto, and the other two are here for the softball baseball proposal.
Okay, so seeing none, I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Second.
It's a second.
Sorry.
Yep.
Mr. Carroll?
Yes.
Mr. Sear?
Yes.
Mr. Engler?
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan?
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Yes.
Mr. Martelli?
Yes.
And Chairman Duval?
Yes. So if we can pause here briefly for a point of order, is it possible if we're doing Zoom to actually make those motions by unanimous consent? That way we don't have to vote on opening and closing public comment, small things like that. We don't have to answer that now, but that's something to think about for next meeting. So any discussion from the board on this project?
Yeah. I'll say this is the third or fourth time I've seen this company grow to the point where they need to come to us and get an expansion. And They're in the kind of place where they can do it. There's nothing controversial about this. It's increased capacity, increased jobs. I think it's great.
Thank you. Others?
Yeah, I've got one thing. So this just more of an education thing for me. When I was reading through the reports, I noticed that there was, this building existed before 1960, and so there was some sort of an exemption for the amount of landscaping needed. Is there a precedent that when they go to expand that they just don't need to add landscaping for those pieces of the building? Is that common?
So the landscaping standards, sorry, I'm trying to remember exactly what they say, but I believe it's, they have to landscape 20% of the building footprint and maybe 10% of the parking areas. And so last month, or back in October when we were reviewing this, the only portions that we considered for that landscaping requirement were the new portions that were going to be added as additions, because the portion of the building that was already there in the 60s wouldn't be subject to the ordinance requirement today. So we exempted the portion that already existed, and anything moving forward will have to meet that 20% and 10% landscaping requirement. So the footprint of the new proposed area meets that requirement, and the parking area does as well.
That works for me. And, I'd like to echo what Mr. Sears said and just congratulate the business for doing so well and needing to expand again. This is great.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Other thoughts and comments? Yeah, I agree as well. If there's nothing more from the board, then I'd be looking for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Sear.
I make a motion to approve the site plan for a Phase 3 expansion of Future Guard at 101 Merrill Road, parcel ID number 186-015, for a 3,258 square foot main entrance addition with adjustments to parking on both sides, relocation of the showroom to the southerly corner of the factory, and a 9,930 square foot addition for a larger showroom and reception area, a new entrance on the west end of the building, and 30 new parking spaces adjacent to the entrance, a 14,846 square foot addition for an additional manufacturing area, and 20 new parking spaces proposed at the rear of the site with the following conditions. A, no development activity until any bonding or inspection fees is determined by the Auburn Engineering Department. And B, the Auburn Airport shall be notified a minimum of 5 days in advance of any crane higher than 75 feet in height used on site.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, any discussion of the motion?
Mr. Carroll?
I second. No discussion.
Mr. Sear?
Yes.
Mr. Engler?
Yeah.
Mr. Finnegan?
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Yes.
Mr. Martelli?
Yes.
And Chairman Duval?
Yes. All right, great. Thank you. We now come to item 6 on the agenda, which is public comment. So I think we need a motion to open public comment.
No, this is not. This
doesn't.
Right. So this one doesn't.
It's right. So if any members of the public are here and would like to comment now, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 7, miscellaneous. We have 3 things in this. 7A is, we've discussed on the board several times making a recommendation to City Council to update the comprehensive plan, and in so doing, to also align the zoning with the future land use so that we do not have places where they are in conflict. I also heard at a previous meeting that Mr. Sear was interested in putting some time constraints around the amount of time city council would be suggested to do that. So I wondered, just as an introduction, to put that out there and to hear what other members of the planning board think about this.
Well, it's due. It's time they did it. Let's ask them to do it.
Okay. Any other thoughts, comments? So, Mr. Sear, you had talked about trying to put a time frame on the work.
Yeah, I would like to see, and this would require us to draft an ordinance to send to council, and it would be part of Chapter 60, which is why it would be under our purview. And it wouldn't happen now, and it might be something that would happen as we get closer to finalizing the comprehensive plan update. I would like an ordinance that requires that the difference between current land use and the future land use plan be reconciled through rezoning within 5 years of the adoption of the comprehensive plan. And again, I say that I was on the board right after the last one was adopted, and we still have, there is still no zones currently in the city that are described within the comprehensive plan. We've done, there's no change. So, and those of you that have been on the board recognize the issues it causes for us when we make decisions, and the issues it causes for individuals in the community too.
So to that end, Mr. Sear, do you think 5 years is too long?
Having actually drafted a new zone, no. And Mr. Cousins was the planner, was actually the city planner working with us at the time. And correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but I think that singular zone took us something like on the order of 6 to 9 months to draft before we felt it was good to send to city council.
It takes a lot of work with a lot of public input when you're talking about a substantial area. So I don't think that's unreasonable. And I think the comp plan kind of lays out a range of densities in the residential zones, especially. So more than one of our existing zones might fit into one comp plan category, but it takes a lot of work to draw those boundaries.
Okay.
It might
And
be,
so this,
sorry.
go ahead.
I was just going to say it might be helpful for the sake of the new members just to give them an example of some situations we've run into recently so they kind of know that there's inconsistencies out there. And we can do that offline too, but.
Thanks, Megan. I'd appreciate that offline. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That would be useful. So in terms of what we would do now, we would write a communication to the city council urging them to update the comp plan.
Yeah, they've been talking about it too. If you watch the city council meetings,
yeah,
I would like whatever our correspondence is to be a little more specific in asking, in stating that we understand that they're currently discussing updating of the comprehensive plan, and that we respectfully ask for a proposed timeline as well as specific duties that the planning board will undertake in that process. Just
yep.
to say, look, we want you guys to do this seems sort of...
It's empty.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree.
And staff suggested a list of topics that should be included. We expect that the council will add to that, and you may want to ask to review that and have an opportunity to add to it or comment before it's finalized.
I think that would be excellent to add.
I agree. Would you also want to indicate your desire to create the ordinance you described earlier?
No, they're taking long enough to decide whether or not they're actually going to start reviewing the comprehensive plan that I don't want to throw anything out that's going to cause discussion.
Cause them to take longer?
Right. Once the process is started, then I think we can.
Okay, fair enough. Anyone else have any thoughts about a communication to City Council? Okay, so to review, the proposal would be to indicate that we understand that they're updating the plan or considering updating the plan and that we think this is a great idea. To ask them for their timeline for this work. Ask them what specific duties they envision for the planning board in that process. And ask them for a list of topics that they're hoping to focus on as they review and update the comp plan.
I would add to that last one. I liked Eric's suggestion that we not only ask for that list of topics, but that we ask for the drafted list and explicitly state so that way we can review and add additional topics that may be that can be considered for their review. Also, Mr. Duval, so you know, traditionally the chair gets to write these letters and then they send them out for the board to look over and give feedback on. So have fun.
I'm happy to throw some together and send it around because I have nothing else to do. Just like reading that 420-page binder.
It's nothing compared to city council. So,
well, right, but we didn't sign up for that. Anything else that any members of the planning board would like to throw out in this area? Okay, so I will draft something and send it around to the planning board, probably via staff.
Works for me.
Okay, thank you. Item 7B, upcoming items for July.
So I know that we've received one while Megan's writing notes. I don't think there's a second item for the July meeting, but the new Edward Little High School will be up for planning board review at the July meeting. So that's a big project. We expect a lot of public participation. And we've also scheduled an earlier neighborhood meeting to meet with all of the direct abutters and people across the street to try to address some of their concerns before it gets to you guys. That will be on June 23rd.
Are we still thinking we'll be doing Zoom in July?
Yeah, that was going to be my question for 7C there. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So I think if we had a normal meeting with average projects or even above average projects like we had tonight, then I think we could safely assume we'd have less than 50 people in attendance. I'm not sure if the 50 people in attendance is going to change by then or if it would work for the high school hearing. I suspect we'll exceed that for the high school hearing. So almost purely because of the actual project, we'll probably plan on Zoom.
You think you'll get 50 by Zoom?
Well, and the alternative could be that the planning board and a limited number of members of the public are able to register and come to city council chambers. We could certainly look at setting that up the way the council is now, if you wanted to.
I would prefer that.
I would.
We got to get back in there. These meetings are not cool on this.
Let us explore that with the IT staff, but I think we could make that happen, that at least the planning board staff and the applicants could be in city council chambers and maybe even a reservation system for up to 50 people at City Hall.
I like the sounds of that.
Great, we can plan on it.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so a question about that, would that, given the new ordinance about indoor public space masking, would we need to be masked?
I think we need to work with IT staff and the manager's office. If we can set it, we can find out how many people we can set up to easily accommodate social distancing. It's when we can no longer accommodate social distancing that we have to mask up.
I think if we're inside, I'll be masking up.
We may be able to do 20 to 25 people in council chambers with social distancing and have another room across the hall that has other people in it that can come in as we have a public hearing, rotate people through.
That works.
And have a Zoom component for those that prefer it.
It may be that some of us mask. 3 hours in an enclosed space is a long time. So,
well, and if we follow the model set forth by the council too, members of the board or city staff that are unable or uncomfortable with coming in, Zoom in. You know, I mean that's.
Auburn City Council is the only council in the state that's meeting in person. I don't know that it's necessarily the best decision for us.
Well, I think it sounds like staff has some discussions to do with their staff, and we can maybe revisit this online ahead of the next meeting.
Yeah, so I think we can certainly have planning board and staff and the consultants in the council chambers, even if we're bringing the public in via Zoom, if that's a preferred compromise.
Okay, well, maybe we can put forth a series of options and have people weigh in on those different possible scenarios.
Great, we'll plan on doing that.
Okay.
I think for the high school one, like you said, there's going to be a lot of public comment on that one. So I don't know that having them come into the building would be, maybe after July would be a good idea, but that is going to bring a lot of people in to try to come in and talk about it.
I agree.
Yep. I don't know that there's a dispute about that.
Well,
so yeah, go ahead, Mr. Carroll.
Sorry. And if the alternative was to Zoom, then why can't we meet in person on that one and the public can Zoom? If they're going to Zoom anyways, doesn't mean we have to.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
One other option might be to, if this is the only project in July, to have the meeting in the gymnasium at Edward Little High School too. I could explore that with the school department.
Okay.
Or inland of the track.
Maybe if the weather's good.
Yeah, outside. I like that. Festival Plaza. We can all mic up and sit on stage. So thank you. I'll work with staff and we will put together some possible scenarios for that meeting. Any other items for discussion? Eric, I think you had one.
I do. I'm going to pull in Travis Bashaw and Mark Goslin here. They're on the line. Travis is, I think his title is president of the Auburn Suburban Baseball and Softball Leagues. And Mark Goslin is the director of sports tourism for the city. And what I'd like to do is kind of give an overview first and then have Mark and Travis talk a little bit about what this ball fields project means to them and their roles within the community. Mount Appetite and the Auburn suburban ball fields are currently accessed. The main access is off of the National Army Guard property, off of Garfield Road, and Mount Appetite Road is the short dead end street that the Guard shares with the baseball fields and the Mount Appetite access. The Army National Guard does not own their land. They lease it from the Army Corps of Engineers. So it's federally owned land leased to a state National Guard entity. And years ago, there was an agreement struck between the city, Auburn Suburban Little League at the time, and the National Guard and Army Corps to build ball fields on Army Corps land. And there was a verbal arrangement for some kind of a land swap to happen where the Guard and Army Corps would acquire some of Mount Appetite in exchange for allowing the ball fields on that property. The permitting didn't happen exactly as it should have. And as it turned out, the construction that happened on the site on land owned by the Army Corps and leased to the State Guard, construction was completed by the Guard, and they never obtained their permits from the Army Corps of Engineers, who not only required the permits, but was also the landlord at the site. That was corrected over time, and license agreements were put in place to allow the ball fields to be used on the site. They were licensed to the city, and the city licensed them to Auburn Suburban Little League. Those agreements have since expired. Nobody wants to kick the children off the ball fields. Many of the Guard members and themselves played ball growing up on those fields, and their children now play ball on those fields. So the city has worked with the Army National Guard to do a joint land use study that was completed in 2014 to lay out what some of the options might be to correct that conflict, but also to correct the conflicts that exist between National Guard traffic and a lot of kids running around and parked cars and people accessing Mount Appetite. There's just a natural risk involved with mixing all of those different types of traffic at the busy times for all of the user groups. So after the joint land use study was completed, one of the major issues was addressing those conflicts. The Army National Guard and Army Corps did a land use valuation project to determine what kind of a land swap ratio would be acceptable to them. The joint land use study adopted by the city said a 1-to-1, so 1 acre of ball fields for 1 acre of Mount Appetite. That kind of a ratio would be acceptable. The Army Corps came back with that their land was worth 3 times as much per acre as the city's land. So for 1 acre of ball fields, we needed to give them 3 acres of Mount Appetite, and that translated into about 80 acres of Mount Appetite, and that was seen as unacceptable to the city. One of the other options is to relocate the ball fields to a different site, and we didn't think that would be cost feasible. We didn't have another location picked. And over this past year, some things have changed that make that a much more likely possibility. And the kind of the combination of the land use planning in the joint land use plan with the National Guard, the work that Auburn Suburban has been doing, and the city's plans and the comp plan for a combined athletic facility, it's kind of like all the stars are aligning that it might actually be feasible with minimal investment from the city to have a new consolidated ball field complex. I'll ask Travis or Mark to kind of explain from their perspectives what this project might mean, and then I can talk a little bit about the timeline for permitting.
Can you guys hear me? This is Mark Oslin.
Yes.
Hi, everybody, this is Travis as well.
Travis, you kind of want to go first about how Travis and I kind of had a conversation. Travis and I know each other, personally and professionally, and we got talking about certain things. And I'm going to let Travis talk about, if you don't mind, Travis, about talking about the land acquisition and about how you are able to acquire the piece of land that's seen here in the picture.
Yeah. First of all, thanks everybody for allowing me to come tonight and just talk a little bit about the project that we are hopefully going to have the ability to make happen. As Eric well explained, the history of Auburn Suburban and the Mount Appetite area does go back much further than I do with the organization. I've been president now for the past year and have sat on the board for the past 7 years, and I was currently vice president for 3 years prior to this past year. Last June, we were approached by Robert Foss and Land Tree Corp with a proposal that they would like to land gift us a parcel of land on the corner of Hotel and Stevens Mills. And knowing the situation with the fields at Appetite and knowing that it was the Army Corps of Engineers land and that we didn't have a real spot to call Auburn Suburban our home, it was an opportunity that we couldn't pass by. So this past December, we were given the land, and the first thing we did was we met with Mark, and I had known the past history with Jeff Benson, the previous president, and an integral part of Auburn Suburban. I had known the history of the land use agreement at the Appetite complex now. So we knew something had to be done in order for us to really have a place that we could have our ball fields at, allow the National Guard to have their land back. And the traffic with the National Guard on the weekends was always something that we knew was a point of contention with them. And since we've acquired this land, Mark and I and Eric have met a couple of times just to discuss the potential of how can we best utilize this land and have it be a home for Auburn Suburban and have it be an outdoor recreational space for the community, and how can it help bolster the city of Auburn's opportunity at having a site that may lend to the whole sports tourism initiative. So from Auburn Suburban standpoint, we knew this was something that we had to pursue, and we had to look into it and try to make the best of the land that we were given, and how could we best utilize it for Auburn Suburban, the city of Auburn, and the community members in our city. So that's a little bit of a brief summary of how we acquired the land and our intentions and what we'd like to do with it.
Yeah, and I'd like to piggyback on that, and thank you, Travis, for doing that and sharing that information. As Travis, Eric, and I, in discussion of this, we've started discussing and trying to explore ways of how a private and public partnership could work best with the city and Auburn Suburban, and knowing the challenges that have been there in the past, and what's exciting about a project like this, and I think Eric said it best too, is, this resolves, a current land ownership issue. It also preserves and improves that, we could also preserve and improve access to Mount Appetite. It also and as Eric says, accomplishes a comprehensive plan goal to create a consolidated athletic field complex We have had conversations with the Maine Army National Guard to assist us with this project. And the way the timing has worked out with the COVID situation, the pandemic situation, some of their overseas projects and other projects have been put on hold. And we would have the opportunity to get them to help us with this project sooner than expected, simply because they are looking for projects, and this could be a project that could be high on their priority list and in the queue. And then the private-public partnership with Auburn Suburban, giving them first right, to the facility and to the land and to the resources that are there. It would also allow us the ability to have this as a great facility for the public, our community, community access, rentals, but also from a sports tourism standpoint. The city invested in a Huddle Up kind of proposal, or a Huddle Up group, to come look at how sports tourism can impact the city of Auburn. And they addressed some weaknesses in their report. And this specific type of project addresses, 5 of those weaknesses. We're going to improve our sports tourism infrastructure. We're going to, address improvement in resources to our recreation department and also our community, and, our Auburn Suburban Baseball and Softball Little League. It will also allow us to continue to concentrate efforts to quantify and communicate the effect of sports tourism on the city of Auburn. We have a great anchor facility, the Norway Savings Bank Arena, and this will not become another anchor facility, and ultimately improve access to sports and recreation in the community. So a lot of this is an opportunity for us to partner not just with Auburn Suburban, but the Maine Army National Guard, and hopefully resolve some issues all with one project.
Mark, if I could just add,
sure.
I started talking with Travis and Mark in the city manager's office. They've also spoken to the city council about this project. But we started talking late fall, early winter, thinking that this summer would be our chance to work with Auburn Suburban. They could put together a fundraising plan. We could sort of take our time and do all required permitting for what would be the best use of the site. And until about a month ago, we kind of continued along that plan until the Maine Army National Guard called and said they can't go on their international trips this year. Is there any chance we could do the grading for this project in August on our 2-week drill? We don't have fully designed plans. We've worked with Jones Associates at this point to come up with a set of plans that would not require a wetland impact permit because it disturbs less than 4,300 square feet. And I know that staff and the board have been frustrated in the past with developers going ahead and clearing more land than what they need for a project before they seek the board's approval. But this is a unique opportunity to have the site cut and graded to the extent that it can be done without impacting too many wetlands in August by the Maine Army National Guard at essentially no cost to the city or Auburn Suburban, and it might actually generate a little bit of income from the sale of timber. So that's really the main point in being in front of the board kind of at the 11th hour tonight, is to say, hey, what do you think about if we take advantage of that opportunity with the commitment that we will get to work on plans, including traffic, stormwater, all of the other things that go along with a ball field project like this. And we would go ahead and clear the site and do rough grading, but we'll be back in front of the board with any and all information you need before actual construction of ball fields takes place.
Mr. Sear?
Yeah, so Eric, is this going to come to us as a special exception or a site plan review?
Yes, site plan and special exception.
And special exception because it's a special exception for this zone?
Well, it's recreational uses are a special exception in the zone.
Okay.
The municipal uses are permitted, but we really didn't want to try to make that stretch and not have the public process that addresses all the traffic and other issues.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering why it was needed to come to us in the first place.
It could be done, but we think it's important to have a public process that reviews the actual project when it's finalized.
Yeah, especially something that's as important to the community as this. I agree. You don't want controversy. And Eric, what do you need from us tonight? I mean, obviously we can't make some sort of we can't make an approval of something,
right,
with regard to a future site plan. So what?
So legally, Auburn Suburban could go cut trees out there and do grading in preparation for some use, even if it was yet unknown. But I just don't want to upset or bias the board by not making you aware of it, because we will be coming back for an approval. I don't want to frustrate the board with them moving ahead, but that being said, it's such an incredible opportunity to have the grading done at a substantial savings at no cost to the city of Auburn Suburban that I hate to pass up that opportunity. The joint land use study groundwork also may make us eligible, combined with the visibility of this project and how it fixes the conflicts at the guard site, may make us eligible for a grant program called the ACUB. It's the Army Compatible Use Buffer Program. We're exploring that as a funding mechanism for actual construction down the road. But I would like to, and we have funding in place for permitting, I would like to go ahead and have them do the clearing in July after the neighborhood meeting. The guard do the site stump removal and grubbing in August, and hopefully have full plans ready for submittal in September or October to go through a public process to actually get an approval to construct fields out there.
And are you asking for anything from us tonight, or is this really just for our edification?
It's I'm doing it basically to confirm that I'm not really going to frustrate you by working with them to move forward on that component of the project that doesn't necessarily require planning board review at this time.
And are you asking for anything from us, or?
No, just if you think that it will absolutely make it hard for you to objectively review the project later, then we want to know that.
I would say no personally. I hope other members of the board will recognize that this is actually really nice. With this hasn't happened to me on the board in like 9 years, where I know ahead of time that something's going to be cleared for a project, and that it's actually going to be cleared for this project. So the owner is well within their rights to go ahead and do it without any approvals from us. So I appreciate staff's understanding the frustration that the board has had recently and letting us know ahead of time.
And taking advantage of the opportunity available of the labor in August. It seems like a really good idea.
Mr. Martelli?
As everybody knows, the city has a comprehensive plan that we work off of. And when Pete came on board, Pete, the city manager, he put together a strategic plan. And part of that strategic plan was recreation. And this would be a good addition to not only the arena, but to other baseball fields in the area. And it would bring up to date baseball fields for the kids. And I think it's a great idea. I do have a couple of questions though. Does the city give the existing baseball fields back to the National Guard? And the second question is, if we give them those fields, does the National Guard step back away from Mount Appetite?
So So they own the fields right now, and our license to use them has expired.
All right.
They haven't kicked us out, but that would eliminate the need for a land swap. And I think with that Army compatible use buffer program and fundraising, potentially we could have a different access constructed to Mount Appetite so we don't share it with the Guard anymore, as well as these new ball fields to replace the old ones.
Will the National Guard not step on Mount Appetite?
They will not require any land as part of a swap. The whole need for a swap will go away if they're able to use the ball fields portion for their use.
So that leaves the bike track up there and everything else that's up there.
There's a lot of benefits to moving those fields, and that's definitely one of them. They will not take any of Mount Appetite.
All right, very good.
Mr. Staples.
Yeah, I guess to that end is the National Guard going to close the Garfield Road entrance and force people to use the Hatch Road entrance from Mount Appetite?
The joint land use study suggests a couple of locations immediately to the north of the current entrance or immediately to the south of the current entrance. So we would still have one that's accessible by pedestrians from that neighborhood. And most of the community, it's closer to park on that side of the park. So before anything happens with closing that, we would expect that there would be something else constructed, or even if there is nothing else constructed, sharing that entrance between Mount Appetite traffic and eliminating the ball field traffic would be a big step in the right direction.
All right. Well, Travis and Mark, this looks great. I like that the ball field here, the baseball field allows Pettingill Park's baseball field to be converted to a softball field. I think there's a dire need for that. So this is a good thing.
Thank you.
Hey, Eric, I have a quick question. I really do appreciate that you brought this to us. Does this conflict in any way with the future land use plan?
The future land use plan shows it as a residential zone. And in the current residential zone that has a similar density, it does allow as a special exception for recreational uses or as a permitted use, municipal uses. So
okay.
I don't think there's a direct conflict, and we can double check that.
Yeah, so this is Stacy. So this is my first time on this. So we're going to get plans, right? So obviously I'm looking at this on my Zoom. I didn't catch something about the softball field in Pettingill Park. So we're going to get like a comprehensive review of what the suggestion is, correct?
Yes, certainly. It doesn't start.
Okay.
None of the information we have shows, as far as I know, anything about Pettingill. I think
maybe I misinterpreted what I just heard. Okay.
That was me. I'm sorry.
All right. Sorry about that. I just probably misinterpreted it. Okay.
But the plan would be to remove the trees, do some grading out there, and before there's any actual construction of parking or fields, you would have a complete package of information.
Okay, cool.
Meets the ordinance.
All right. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Eric. I will echo Mr. Sears' comments that it's very nice to hear about this before anything happens.
And we will hold a neighborhood meeting just to make sure we're addressing any concerns of the neighbors on the 24th of June if you're interested in it.
Okay, that's great.
And Mr. Duval, if I can just kind of pipe in here just a quick second, and just to echo everything, is we just want it to be fully transparent, and from the city standpoint, we're super appreciative of Auburn Suburban, who is, has this piece of property and has, is looking at the city from a partnership standpoint, and allowing us to work together as a group to not just just to improve, baseball and softball, but, provide what we think will be a great addition to an asset to the city, and hopefully have an economic impact in the area around it. Everything from housing to, restaurants in the Minot Avenue area, and could be a good trickle down effect there. We're super appreciative of Travis, coming to the table with us and talking about this. And we certainly appreciate your time and your input as we consider to move forward with this.
Thank you. So any other planning board items for discussion? Anybody have anything else?
Just that Travis has his hand raised.
Oh, does he?
I just like to circle back and just sum up. Thank you to all you for hearing us tonight, and it does mean something, that it means something to you, that you are thoughtful of us coming to you prior to moving forward. I know in speaking with Mark, that's one thing that I wanted to make sure throughout this whole process was that we were 100% transparent, and we did this the right way, because this was a tremendous opportunity for our organization, who provides a great experience every summer for 500 kids in this community. We have an opportunity to have an outstanding facility, one that we've never had before, to be honest. I'm not from Maine. I'm not from Auburn. I met my wife and moved here 13 years ago, but I've been involved in baseball my whole life. And this is a tremendous opportunity for our city and for our organization. So thank you for your time. And please feel free, if any of you were to have any questions that refer to me, please do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. So yeah, any other items from the planning board? Seeing none.
Motion to adjourn.
Well, yeah, I was about to say that we're before 9 o'clock. It's the first time in my planning board tenure, which is admittedly short, that we're in under 9 o'clock. So there's a motion.
All right, this is Stacy. Don't tell me that, because my tenure might be short then. My bedtime's like 8:30. I'm kidding.
So we got a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
We need a second.
We need a second.
All in favor?
Bye, you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Hey, Eric.